Yep, I can hear you.
Great. I'll share my screen in a moment, but just before I do, can I ask you please to have by your elbow a pencil and paper, or maybe you can use your cell phones. I'll ask you to write down some things, not very much, very brief notes, so don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to write a whole essay, but I want you to note down some things as we go through. This session is basically a workshop, and there are some things which you can't do online and some things which you can. And the things which I can do online, I'd really like to do with you, and I'd like you to participate. So let's start. Let me share my screen, and please tell me if you can see it okay. Okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yep. Great. Good. Okay. So I'm going to start off. I hope that by now you will have pencil and paper by you. Start off by defining what I mean by a mixed ability class, and I'd like to redefine it as heterogeneous. Mixed ability has to do with a class which has different levels of English, if you like, or different abilities in English. I prefer to talk about heterogeneous classes. I don't use this in the title because it's rather a long word and it's not altogether clear, so I want to explain it. Heterogeneous means of different kinds. So in our mixed classes, we have students who are of different kinds, not just as regards their ability, but also other aspects, like, for example, their ability, their level of English, and also other things. I'm going to ask you to suggest to me, and I'll try and write in, as you say, either on the chat box or I think we'll have to use a chat box because we've got a very large class here. So skills and ability written. Can you write in any other ideas? You have the different ways in which our students vary from one another. Backgrounds you've written. Okay, let me see if I can keep up with you. Backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, sometimes linguistic backgrounds, sometimes behavior, certainly. A cultural background, interests, certainly. Thinking, sorry, I've missed that up. Interests, thinking, hobbies, yes. Vision, information processing, yes. I think that's the same as the way they think. Socioeconomical, socio-emotional background. Attention span, which is really important, yes. And also that means different abilities to discipline themselves. Cognition or intelligence, how quickly they understand and solve problems. And many others as well. Learning style, someone wrote in. Aptitude and perception. That's great. I'm sure that the ideas will carry on coming in, but I want to move back into our full screen. These are some of the ways the groups are varied. And this means that we have to cater not only for different abilities, but also for different people, different ways. And some problems which come up from this. And here I'm just going to talk about them. I would invite you to contribute at this point. If you think of things that I've forgotten, please add. Providing for learning for all, perhaps the most important one. How, in a very, very mixed class, how do I cater for all the different kinds of students in my class and get them all to learn English? Time management, how do I manage time, fast, slow? How much time do I spend on different things? Addressing individuals, reaching the individual, creating relationships with the different students, particularly when your mixed class is also a large one. Assessment is a huge problem, which I'm not going to actually address in this session. I'm going to talk more about how to reach the students with learning rather than how to assess their learning, but I acknowledge that assessment is one of the main problems. Classroom discipline, I don't know how disciplined the classes are in the different places you come from. This was one of my main problems as a teacher, maintaining discipline, maintaining smooth running, and it's much more difficult when the class is very mixed. Interest and motivation, how can we maintain their interest when they have different interests and they're motivated by different things? So all these are problems. Of all of these, providing for learning of all is the primary one. We're teachers. Our job is to get the students to learn, and this is perhaps the primary thing which worries us. It's always challenging, as Alice has just written in the chat box, and I think that's the bottom line. It's a challenge. So let me see if in this session I can suggest some things which can help. I'm not talking about solving problems here. I'm not I don't claim to solve, but what I can suggest in this webinar is some practical ideas, practical principles expressed in practical teacher strategies or student strategies, which can help to address the different problems which we've identified. So I'm going to put these under three headings. One is motivation and interest. How can I keep them interested? With two subheadings here. One is variation and one is interest. How to make things interesting to different levels of the class. Cognitive and affective aspects. Some of you mentioned the affective side of personalities. So I'm going to talk about individualization, which mainly has to do with the cognitive side. And also personalization, and I will be defining what I mean. Those are two different things, and I'll explain the difference between them when I get there. Number 5 is collaboration, working together. And the third section, I'm going to talk about learner agency and choice, giving students an opportunity to choose how they learn. They learn in different ways, in different levels, and give them some choice into what they do and don't do. So 2 subheadings here. One is something I call open ending. I'll explain when I get there. And the other is a strategy called compulsory plus optional. Okay, so far, can you just write yes in the chat box if I'm clear so far and it's okay? My accent is okay, my speed is okay. If there's anything you want me to slow down, speed up, I'm getting lots of yeses, so I'm assuming that's okay. If there's any problem with communication during the webinar, please feel free to write down in the chat box if there's anything which I can clarify. Thank you very much for your responses so far. Great, thanks. Okay, so moving on. My first item was variation. This is a fairly short one. I just want to summarize. Famously, Abraham Lincoln is supposed to have said, you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. And in our context, and to be a little bit more serious, quite honestly, when you have a large heterogeneous class, you can teach all of the students some of the time and some of the students all of the time. You cannot teach all of the students all of the time. We are human beings, and there's no way we can do things which gets everybody activated and learning all the time, because they're all different. And therefore, what I need to do is make sure that I have variation, that I vary my lessons so that a student who prefers, say, for example, to work collaboratively, so I give some group work at some point, but students who prefer to work on their own, I give opportunities to work on their own. Students who are going more slowly, I spend some of my time going slower and some faster, so I can cater to different speeds. So I need to make sure that I vary things in my lessons from lesson to lesson, because I know that I cannot possibly teach all of the students all of the time. So I'll vary the topic because they have different interests. I will vary the demands because there are higher, lower abilities, and they can catch on quicker or faster in terms of level, pace, and amount of material that I am presenting. I will vary classroom organization. Some students prefer to be taught by a sort of top-down teacher-led process. Others prefer working with each other, and yet others prefer working on their own. I'll try to make sure that I provide for all of these by varying the way I organize my classroom. Learning style, one of you mentioned when we were listing the differences. Analytical, non-analytical. Some students really like the grammar to be explained to them. Some prefer to pick it up intuitively. Some like being very productive. Some are more receptive in their learning style. Some of them prefer working on their own or with others, as I said, all sorts of different learning styles. And I also need to vary material, whether I work from the textbook, use worksheets, use the board, use computer-mediated material, digital activities. So to cater for the different kinds of students. So this is just an overview of the kinds of things. And this is really the first and most important topic. And I'll move on to the next one now, which is interest. Now, interest is an extremely difficult term to define. If you try to say for yourself, if I ask you, what is interest in terms of classroom interaction, what is interest in the classroom, you will find it very, very difficult to define. It has to do maybe with curiosity, with challenge, with enjoyment. It's sort of a combination of all these, but it's a very slippery, interestingly very varied. Yes, it's a very slippery concept. What we can say is, although it's very difficult to define, it is essential. We all know intuitively what we mean. But tasks may be too easy or too difficult and therefore boring. If I make an activity, I've got to do a fairly simple activity, say, and I know that my more advanced students might be bored because it's not challenging enough, and therefore I need to think about how to make it interesting so that even if it's below their language standard, the challenge of whatever the interesting task is will keep them going. It's not just topics, it's also tasks, or perhaps more essentially tasks, because an interesting topic can be killed by a boring task, and conversely, a boring topic can be brought alive by an interesting task. So let's look for the moment at what makes things interesting. So even tasks at inappropriate level may keep student interest if they are well designed. And this is where I really want to try something out with you. Let's see if it works. Let's say we've got a whole lot of vocabulary items, the ones you can see on the screen here, which come from a reading comprehension text. Doesn't really matter what the text was, but I want to practice this vocabulary, which I've taught the students, and I want to activate them in doing things with them, and I want to see what kinds of tasks are more or less interesting. And what I would like you to do, I asked you before to have pencil and paper ready. Those of you who came a bit later may not have heard me, but I asked you to have pencil and paper, or you can possibly do it on your telephones. I think it's easier with pencil and paper. And I want you to just write down 2 columns, very easy columns. The first column, write A, B, C, D, E vertically. These are the 5 exercises I'm going to try to do with you, and I want you to try them out. I'll ask you to either write in questions in the chat box or write down on your bit of paper, or possibly even just respond orally or in your mind and tell me for each one of them how interesting it was. And the score is, if you think the activity was very, very interesting and would keep your students really, or of all levels, interested in doing it, give it a 5. If you think it was utterly boring, give it a 1. And if you think it was sort of medium, then give it something like a 2 or a 3. So I don't want you to think about how good the activity is, but how interesting it would be to do. So please have your pencil and paper ready and see what you think. So we're starting with the first activity. I'd like you to do it. Either write in the answers in the textbook, in the chat box, or on your bit of paper. I've also got some paper by me, so I'll be noting down things later. Okay, so the first task is this. A, write or say a sentence using one of the words. It's a fairly standard task. So can you do that, please? Either in the chat box or on your bit of paper, take one of the words and make a sentence. Okay, and I don't want you to give a score yet, just give me a sentence for the moment. A sentence. Afraid of the dark. All right. Yes, I'm afraid of being asked when I'm not ready. Lovely, thank you. I love dolphins. Okay. And different kinds of things. Other people might think that snow is freezing, or a dolphin has muscles, or and I was in an international competition, things like that. Okay, can you please now write down a score of 1 to 5, where 5 is that was really interesting, 1 it was dead boring, 2 or 3 it was sort of middling. So write down your score. You can. I'd like you to write it down. You can do it in the chat box, certainly, but I'd like you to remember it, write it down on a piece of paper, because I'm going to ask you to recall what your score was in a minute in a poll. Let's go on to B, the next one is write or say a sentence using 2 of the words. So you have to find one sentence which uses 2 of the words. Actually, I'd like you not to write in your scores on the chat box, because it tends to influence people. Okay, so just keep your scores to yourselves if you can. Exercise makes muscles stronger. You can actually alter your scores later if you like. We'll see later. Yes, nice. That I was disabled to swim when I was 10. Please lie down for your physical therapy. Okay, so that's sentence using 2 of the words. What score would you give that? 5. Very interesting. 1. Dead boring. Was it more or less interesting than one before? And give the score on your piece of paper. I'm afraid of dolphins. Lovely ideas there. Okay, can you give that a score on your bit of paper? Third task. Write, say, a sentence which is a false statement. So example, snow is hot, right? I mean, things which are completely wrong. Can you design a false statement using one of the words, or more of them if you like? Dolphins cannot swim, exactly. That's a good example. Okay, can I have some more? Or write them down for yourselves. Dolphins can speak like humans. Snow is super. Snow is super hot. Yes, nice. The water in the pond began freezing. Some nice ideas there. Okay, can you give that a score then? How interesting was that to do? On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being most interesting. D. Write. Can you not write your score in the chat box, please? Rather keep it to yourselves for the moment, because it influences other people if you write it. Write or say a sentence using one of the words that is true of you. So you have to write about yourself, relating to one of the items here, or more than one if you prefer, but it has to relate to you. It has to be true. Okay. Okay. Yes, Shasta, you're still on the previous one. Can you write a sentence about yourself? I am afraid of heights. I'm afraid of heights. Okay. I need therapy. I love to swim in the evening, afraid of heights again. I hosted a competition, lovely. Yes, those are the kinds of sentences I want, ones which are true of yourself. Now, can you give that a score? Not, as I say, in the chat box, but preferably on your bit of paper. What do you think? How interesting was that to do? And the final one is a bit difficult to do this time. You're going to have, I can't ask you to write this one in chat box, it's too long. But say if you're working with a partner, if you happen to be working together with someone, then do it together. And the task is make up a story, beginning once upon a time, using as many of the words as you can. Okay? Once upon a time, there was a dolphin, whatever. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then I'll give you less time than that, a few seconds, to start making up your story. You can say it, or you can write it, or you can just think it, but see if you can make up a story using as many as possible of those words. Quite challenging. If I'm doing this in class, I put the students into groups and I ask them to tell the story, each one of them contributing as they think of something to add, a new event in the story. And what happens in the classroom is that after a little while, they start laughing because trying to get the different words into a story means that you get very odd events coming one after the other in order to contextualize the words. Okay, so give that a score. And now, so you will have, we did these 5 different ones. And what I want to do now is to ask you to write in your answers in a poll. I'm going to try and share the poll, and I hope this will work okay. Where are my polls? Okay, can you see that on your screen? Can you see the poll? Yes. So just answer which score you gave it, where the first one obviously was a 5. So for each one, answer how interesting it was to do, or how boring, and then scroll down to get the other ones, okay? And there are 100 participants, so I'll stop when I've got at least 50 who have answered. Okay, we have so far 30 people have answered, so we're well on our way. And 36, 37, great. And when I see we've got up to 50, I'll stop and I'll display the answers. I'm sorry, I will have not given time to all of you, but I want to move on with this presentation, or we won't get to the end. And I think this is, if I get 50 people, then this gives a fairly good representation. Okay. 47. And okay, we seem to be stuck at 47, so I think I'll move on. I'm going to click on End Poll and Display, and you'll see the results, and then I want to comment on. Okay, so I'm stopping here, end poll, and share results. And can you see the results now? So if we look at the answer to number one, we sort of got quite a lot of people thought it was interesting. There's a sort of slanting line down from very interesting medium, and a few people even said it was boring. The second one, we're finding much less boring and more interesting. The top two get a higher score. So the second one, which used two words, was slightly more interesting. Third question. And this was, sorry, I've just gone to display it. That is a false statement. Again, becoming slightly more, we've got a much heavier balance on the first two. So that was more interesting than the first one, obviously. Statement about me, even more so, that a very high score on the first one, very interesting to do. And the last one, which was really difficult to do, yeah, but even so, got the highest score of all. So what we're seeing here is a movement between, can you see my screen still on my main screen? Now I've good, great. The trouble is I need your response to this because I can't obviously see what you're doing. So if what we found was that on the whole, as I moved on from activity to activity, the score was tending to go up. You're finding a little bit more interest each time. And why? Why was it more interesting, for example, to do a task which says use two words rather than one? Or why was it more interesting to write a full statement? Why was it more interesting to give something personalized about me? Why was it most interesting to tell a story? Any ideas? Yes, you're talking about challenging. Yes, the word challenge keeps coming up, and I think that's really important. Challenging, in fact, has to do with higher order thinking skills. If I challenge, I'm making you think a little bit more than you would have done otherwise. So that's challenge. And then personalization, certainly, different word of imagination. It's tricky to use more than one word. In other words, you're also into this thing about challenge. Critical thinking, lovely, yes. Critical thinking, higher order thinking skills, certainly. So I think this is the point. You're getting put your finger really on most of the main points here. Topic I'm going to put in brackets because it really didn't matter what topic. I could have used any topic I liked, and the strategies for practicing would still have worked the same way. The topic is less important. That's why I put it in parentheses. Visual stimulus you didn't mention, but the fact you've got something to look at is really important. And in this activity, I didn't show pictures, obviously, but if you have pictures, that also helps a lot. Another point which you may not have noticed, but I think is really important, is the fact you had lots of right answers, not just one right answer. And all things being equal, an open-ended Q, one which has lots of right answers, is going to be much more interesting to answer than one which has a predictable one right answer. Success orientation. They are likely to get it right because it's open-ended. Therefore, and I'll come on to this in my later part of my talk more, they can say easy sentences or more difficult sentences, and therefore it's easier to get it right, and therefore you have a higher likelihood of success, which is a part of interest. I like to feel I'm going to get it right. Then your point about challenge, higher order thinking, and your point about also personalization, certainly. And finally, lots of participation of different students. If only one student is speaking at a time, then it's much less interesting than if everybody is either speaking at the same time or is going to have an opportunity to participate. So that's on interest, and there's lots of other things I can do to demonstrate interest, but I think this was a nice sort of introductory workshopy type of thing. Let's move on to my next item, which is individualization. Individualization is, I define it as allowing for individual variation in speed and level, even within a teacher-led procedure. And in this, I'm not going to ask you to work. I would if it was an open face-to-face situation, but online, I'll need to explain and leave it to your imaginations to think about what I'm thinking about. I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about full class questioning. Let's say you've got an exercise. It could be reading comprehension, it could be grammar, it could be general knowledge, it could be vocabulary, but it's an exercise which has, say, 10 items in it, and you want to do it orally with the class. And there are three main ways you can do this. One is the sort of traditional ping pong, where the teacher asks the first question, students raise their hand to answer, the teacher nominates one of the students to answer, and the student answers, and the teacher responds with feedback. It's called in literature IRF, initiation, response, feedback. Teacher initiates, student responds, teacher gives feedback. And it's in all classrooms, in all subjects. It's probably the most common form of teacher-student interaction. But it only allows one student to answer at a time. There's all sorts of limitations. A lot of teachers never think of alternatives. Let me suggest two alternatives to you. Method 2 is the teacher invites students to look through the questions, choose one they think they know the answer to, and the teacher says, you don't necessarily need to know them all, choose one you think you do know. The students raise their hands, but they raise their hands to choose to say, I want to answer question number 4, and this is what I think the answer is. And the teacher gives feedback. So we're giving a little latitude of choice here. So that's method 2. Method 3 goes even further. Method 3 says you can work on your own or with a partner, and here are the questions. You can look through them. She tells them they can write in answer to any of the questions they can, and again, not expecting them to remember them all, but they can help each other. And then finally, the teacher displays the right answers on the board and the students self-correct. Yes, Faria is saying an adult teacher would give students the opportunity to choose what they answer exactly. That's exactly the strategy I'm talking about here. And not all teachers are aware of it. You obviously are, but not all are. Let's just analyze that for the moment. So different modes of interaction. 1, students just hear the questions, raise their hands, and nominated to answer. Students read and hear, prepare individually, then volunteer answers to items they know. And finally, students answer questions they know individually or with partners, and then self-check. Let's analyze that a moment. In conventional teaching, students don't pre-read, they read only together with the teacher. With heterogeneous and engaging teaching, they have the possibility of pre-reading and preparing. In conventional ping pong, the questions are done in an order decided by the teacher. In heterogeneous teaching, the questions are done in order chosen by the students. So I want to answer question 5, I will answer question 5. I don't have to do exactly the one the teacher has told me to do. In conventional teaching, each student is working on their own. In heterogeneous, and I said before, students some students prefer working on their own, some students prefer working collaboratively. And I think it's really important sometimes to say, you can work with another student or on your own, you choose. And they have that choice and that flexibility. An important point is that in the conventional procedure, the teacher implies that the students have to know all the answers. They're expected to know all the answers. And in heterogeneous teaching, the teacher implies or says that it's okay not to do them all. She is, in a sense, legitimizing not knowing. So the students who don't know answers don't have to feel so bad. They answer the ones that they can. And finally, in conventional ping pong, the teacher checks the answers, and more heterogeneous, the students are allowed to check their own. So that's a way of individualizing question-answer sessions. Another individualization, which I really like, and I'm going to say this very briefly because I want to get on, is something called pass it round. I give each student a copy of the worksheet you can see in front of them. I say to them, write in 4 opposites. You'll notice that the words here are of very different levels. So again, I'm catering to different levels here. Day, night is very easy, but vague, imprecise, whatever you're going to say as the opposite, is very difficult. Fill in any 4 you can. Raise your hand with the paper above your head. Find someone else who has also raised their hand. Exchange with them. Write in another 4. Raise your hand, and so on around the class. And the paper goes around the class with each student working at their own speed. When they finish and exchange with someone else. And then at the end of the activity, I display the answers and they self-check. And the advantage of this kind of interaction is that students, again, are working at their own speed, at their own level. They don't feel that they have to keep up with everyone else or do exactly the same as everyone else. Element of choice, and much more heterogeneous and learner-friendly, particularly to those learners who don't know so much, but also to those learners who learn more because they can work faster and go straight for the more difficult items. And this is a strategy which is surprisingly little used in classrooms and works really well. Let's move on to my next heading, which is personalization. Personalization is not doing according to level and speed, but rather relating to the whole person, allowing contributions, as it says, that reflect personal experiences or backgrounds or memories or opinions. And one example of this is to ask students, this is a rather more advanced class, for each student to write down a household chore they hate, someone famous they'd like to meet, and something that really irritates them. And then they get up and walk around the classroom and find other students who agree or don't agree, and they exchange ideas. But it's very personal, and it's really nice to find someone else who feels the same as you do about things that irritate them or someone they'd like to meet. It's a really enjoyable but very good in the sense that it caters to mixed, different kinds of personalities and tastes and experiences. So this just explains on the screen what I just said orally. Another personalized activity for a high-level class, which I really like, is what is the best metaphor for a lesson? As a teacher, which metaphor would you choose, which you think represents an English lesson for you? I'll tell you what mine is in a moment. Can you just write into the chat which metaphor you would choose, which you think is most appropriate to represent what goes on in an English lesson? A symphony. Okay, that's nice. You really have a sort of harmonious image in your mind. Climbing a mountain, conversation. Nice, yes, very much has it. I mean, all of these are in a sense a variety show. Yeah, I have some sympathy with that one. No one's chosen mine yet. I'll tell you what mine is in a moment. Climbing a mountain because of the effort and also the sense of achievement when you get to the top. Sometimes a wedding, yes, conversation again. Okay, mine was doing the shopping because I go into a lesson with a sort of shopping list of what I want to achieve, and I try to get through and do all the things I want to achieve in a sense of satisfaction when all the shopping has been completed. Right, teach history and geography. So it is a conversation, climbing mountains, signs of football. Yes, I think you can justify all of these, but when you do this in the classroom, as you've seen here, it's fairly rare for students to choose the same metaphor. And so they get into conversations with each other, discussing why they chose one or why they chose the other, and and justifying them. And it's a very fruitful and interesting conversation. Collaboration. Learners work together in order to get better joint results than they could on their own. And it's not just group work. There are two types of collaborative activities. One is full class sharing. If you do, for example, brainstorms and then write up on the screen or on the board what all the ideas students have thought of, then it is a kind of collaboration. They're helping each other get to a good result. Pass it round. The strategy I just showed you, and using opposites, is collaborative. They're helping each other and collaborating with each other. And then there's all sorts of online forums, wikis, other types of sharing, WhatsApp, whatever, ways which students share in writing with each other. And of course, the other kind of collaborative activity is pair or group work, which could be the normal routine collaborative pair group work, or the mingling activity, which I suggested with this thing about household chore and so on, which I hate doing, find someone else who feels the same. So any find someone else is a mingling activity, and all of the things you can see on your screen are all collaborative. And one example which I do with a less advanced class is practicing spelling. I show them a set of words on the board and ask them to try to remember all of them, because I'm going to take them off the screen, see how many you can remember. So it's a sort of Kim's game. They look at it, they remember the correct spelling. I take it off the screen. They write down as many as they can, and then they join with a partner or two partners and see if they can help each other remember more and correct each other's spelling. And that's a really good use of collaboration, because they're teaching each other, and clearly, if they work together, they will get better results than if they worked alone. And that's the key to a good collaborative activity. And then I show them again, and they check and remind themselves of the ones they'd forgotten. Note that not all tasks work as group pair activities. Usually pair work works better than group work, because more students obviously are participating. And make sure the task is such it is likely to be done better by a group than by an individual. And then a final question, I've left this as a question for you to tell me what your answer is. Would you allow individuals to work on their own if they prefer, or would you insist that they work in pairs or groups? And as I said, it's very much a question of how students work better. There might be situations where you want to insist. There may well be quite a lot of situations where you will allow them to choose whether they collaborate or work on their own. Yeah, Faria says, let them work on their own if they don't feel like working with others. I feel the same. There might be exceptions where it's really important to you for them to work together, but on the whole, I would agree to you. I'd try wherever possible to allow them to choose what's best for them. My last two headings here are open ending and compulsory plus optional content word. Open ending, I've already mentioned this earlier on. And what it means is having cues or questions that allow for many possible right answers, which encourages creative thinking, so that firstly, more learners can get to respond. With a closed-ended question, only one person can answer. There's only one right answer, or maybe two if one got it wrong, but it's very limited. More learners can get to respond, and crucially, for this topic, learners can respond at different levels. So, for example, just to give you an example of what I mean, at a very basic level, if I were to say Jenny is a baby, Jenny can't ride a bicycle, and they have to give me an answer, it's one right answer. There's only Jenny can't ride a bicycle. That's the only possible answer. And I want to practice can't, but I'm not giving them much opportunity to do so. A very low-level student might not be able to answer it because they might not know the word bicycle or ride. A high-level student can do it, but then has no opportunity to demonstrate what they can say using can't, which this sentence is limiting them and stopping them from doing. So they can only respond at this very low level. So for both kinds of students, the more advanced and the weaker, it's not very satisfactory. If, on the other hand, I say, Jenny is a baby, Jenny can't ride a bicycle, but she can smile. What else can't Jenny do? Immediately, we've got lots and lots of possibilities. So a weaker student might say, Jenny can sleep. And a more advanced student might say something like, Jenny can't open a bank account or something like that. And there's, first of all, there's lots and lots of answers practicing can't, which is exactly what I want. I want them to practice my target structure as much as possible, but they are also answering at different levels. And that is the advantage of open-ended activities. Most textbook items are closed-ended. Why? It's the conventional way of doing things. It's the way we've always done it. Gap fills, matching, multiple choice, they all have one right answer. Very easy to check. Obviously, even a computer can check. And activates lower order thinking skills on the whole. May or may not be easier. Some teachers claim they are, I'm not sure. But you can very often take a closed-ended exercise and make it into an open-ended one, mainly with gap fills, but also with matching exercise and multiple choice. I'll give you an example. And if, as soon as you make an exercise into open-ended, where each item has lots of right answers, you get more learning, it's much more interesting, it's much more individualized and suitable for a heterogeneous class. So let's take this one, for example. A typical closed-ended exercise on the past simple. They have to say, she left early, he made the cake, I sat there for 6 hours, the man read the book. There is no alternative. But supposing we do it the conventional way first, and supposing then we say, okay, you got she left, but I want you to ignore the rest of the sentence and give me a sentence with she left, but a different ending. So the exercise now looks like this. And you get students saying, you can write in if you like any suggestions you have. Things like, she left the room, she left early, she left late, she left because she had a problem, she left abruptly. Thank you, Hansa. She left her husband, she left, and so on. And he made, I sat, and the man read. Also, you can have lots and lots of different possibilities. She left to buy milk, and you get much more heterogeneous, much more mixed level, much more practice. Another alternative, of course, is to delete the verb itself and invite students to practice different past tenses. leaving the rest of the sentence. So then the exercise looks like this. She early, he the cake, I there for 6 hours. The man the book. Let's take the last one. So the man opened the book, the man read the book, the man burned the book, the man sold the book, the man wrote the book. You've got all sorts of possibilities there. She wakes up early, yes, for number one. Thank you, Nazia. And again, it becomes immediately suitable for a heterogeneous class, much more so than the original. And it's very easy to adapt exercises in this way. If you have a multiple choice, you simply delete the options and ask them to suggest answers. If it's a matching, you delete one of the columns and tell them write in whatever you like for the corresponding item in the other column. If it's a gap fill, you delete the bank of words and invite students to put in whatever words they like. She wakes up, he baked the cake, thank you. So also matching is a multiple choice, and the result is more learning and also more interesting, of course, much more interesting to do, as you saw yourself when you were doing it just now, and accessible to students at different levels. Other possibilities for open ending. So can, could, what can you do with, all sorts of different things. Practicing adjective before noun. How many adjectives can you think of to describe a noun? How many nouns can you think of that could be described by an adjective? You could do the same with verbs and adverbs, obviously. So these are creative thinking. An alternative is lateral thinking, which is thinking outside the box, which is doing sort of completely perhaps unexpected types of creative thinking. For example, 10 ways to compare a tree with a pizza. And at the moment, firstly, they look at you as if you're mad, but then they think of lots of different ways, and it gives an excellent way to practice comparative of adjectives. Or both and, think of some ways in which a lesson is like a wedding based on the previous activity. Or interrogatives. Instead of saying, answer these questions, I say, here's an answer. Think of as many questions as you can, to which the answer is, for example, 12. What could be the questions here? Something like, how many months are there in a year? How old are you? What's the time? All sorts of different possibilities, but they are creating questions, and it's a very nice way of practicing question forms. Or in writing, 3 advantages of being an only child, of not having a self-in, advantages of things which are normally seen as disadvantages, or writing negative sentence, practicing the negative, all these sorts of things. 10 things you have never done, not 10 things you have done, but things you have never done. 6 things you can't touch and why. 6 negative things about anything you like, and say 4 nice things about your friend, which again, it's activating higher order thinking skills, isn't it? Trying to think of things in a slightly different way from the way we normally think about it. Normally, we say nice things in the positive. Think of nice things you can say about your friend using negative sentence. She would not be disloyal. She would not give away my secrets, that sort of thing. My final, and I've only got a couple of minutes, I'll give myself 5 minutes to do this one. Compulsory plus optional. And this strategy is basically, the class is given a core task, which you know can be done by them all. It's easy enough to be coped with and performed successfully by all the class, virtually all the class. Maybe 1 or 2 can't, but nearly all of them. They are also given an optional task, which is slightly more difficult, which may be done by some. And typically, the instructions would be something like, do at least or do X and do Y if you have time. So variations: read your book for at least 30 minutes at home, more if you can. Write at least 10 sentences using the new words. Read at least the first paragraph of the text. Find at least 3 sentences on the internet that use the lexical chunk under no circumstances, and so on. A typical exercise, for example, for elementary classes is you give a whole lot of words and say, put these into the appropriate columns: things, people, animals, foods, clothes, and so on, categorizing into different things. But if instead of saying, put the words into the different columns, you say, put at least 3 words in each column, more if you can, then immediately the exercise becomes accessible to the less advanced students in the class, and also appropriate for the more advanced, because they can add as many as they like and finish the whole exercise if they can. So it's this sort of strategy, and it can be applied also to tests. I very often used to give tests in my classrooms with an optional section at the end where you say, okay, most of the test is a standard test and you have to do it all to get 100%. If you do it all right, you get 100%, but you can get bonus marks if you do the extra bit at the end. And this provides an extra incentive to my more confident or more advanced or faster working students, and they get a bit of a bonus on their grade. And just to finish off this section with this presentation with a little story, I once gave this test to a class of mine, a 6th grade. There were 11-year-olds, and they were practicing the past tenses, or being tested rather on the past tenses. And A represents here a section where they had to fill in the right answer, and it was part of the standard test. And B was the optional section at the end, and I said to them, you can finish the story as you like, but not the same way as usual. And one little girl wrote, who was sort of a fairly proficient student, but also with a nice imagination, wrote, the wolf went off through the forest and came to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door. And the grandmother said, come in. And the wolf went in. And the grandmother said, oh, it's you, my dear little wolf. I'm so glad. I thought it was that awful little Red Riding Hood. And, I had to laugh when I read that. It was a lovely variation. And sometimes you get these imaginative and fun results. So, yes, that's the end of my presentation and the end of my time. So I don't think we probably have time for questions, unless you want to write something in on the chat box and I'll try to respond to it. Or, as you see on my screen, there's my email address. If you wish to write and ask me a question or make any comments you like, I'll be delighted to answer. Okay, over to you.
Thank you so much, Penny, for this wonderful session.